I would say so. I would say people come here because they hear me singing, but I'm beginning to believe that more and more people are realizing the message.
Bob Joyce spent much of his life away from the spotlight, but his striking resemblance to Elvis Presley eventually drew public attention. For years, theories surrounded his identity, with some believing there was more to his story. Then, during a television interview, Joyce faced the question that had followed him for years. Was he really Elvis Presley? But what happened when Bob Joyce was finally confronted with the Elvis question? Join us as we find out his reaction. Bob Joyce's shocking Elvis confrontation. Bob Joyce sat calmly in the studio chair, prepared for another interview. He had done this many times before. He knew how to sit, how to smile, and how to tell his story in a way that could make even skeptics stop and listen. But this interview felt different. Something had changed in the host's attitude. He was not openly hostile, but his questions had become sharper and more deliberate. It was almost as if he had discovered something and was waiting for the right moment to reveal it. For years, Bob Joyce had built a controversial theory that seemed almost impossible to believe, yet strangely difficult for some people to ignore. He pointed to photographs, physical similarities, birthmarks, mannerisms, and even voice patterns that he believed connected him to one of the most famous figures in history, Elvis Presley. To them, Joyce was simply chasing an extraordinary idea, hoping he had uncovered one of the greatest secrets of modern history. Joyce had become accustomed to living between belief and ridicule. He knew how to defend his claims, how to answer criticism, and how to respond whenever someone demanded proof. He had prepared himself for almost every question imaginable, but he had not prepared for what was coming. The interview had started normally. The host asked who Bob Joyce was, why his theory had attracted so much attention, and what evidence he believed supported his claims. Joyce answered confidently. He discussed timelines, photographs, physical similarities, and coincidences that seemed more significant the closer they were examined. His evidence was far from conclusive, but his confidence was unmistakable. He spoke like a man who had spent years studying the same mystery and had convinced himself that the pieces finally fit. Then, around the 15-minute mark, everything changed. The host leaned forward slightly. He stopped casually glancing at his notes and placed them on the table. His eyes remained fixed on Joyce. Then he paused before asking his next question. It was subtle, but the atmosphere had changed. The earlier questions had allowed Joyce to explain his theory. This one felt different. It seemed designed to challenge the person behind the theory, not simply the theory itself. "Bob," the host said quietly, "I want you to think carefully before answering this." The room seemed to become completely silent. What if this has become less about Elvis and more about finding a reason to matter? The question struck at something deeper. Joyce was no longer being asked to explain a photograph or defend a timeline. He was being forced to question his own motives. Then came the question everyone was waiting for. The host leaned back and spoke slowly. "Are you Elvis?" A brief silence followed. Then he added, "And more importantly, do you truly believe that? Or have you simply been searching for a reason to matter?" For the first time, Joyce's confidence appeared to weaken. His expression changed. For years, Joyce had spoken with certainty about the theory. But now, faced with a question that challenged not only his evidence, but his reasons for believing, he appeared caught off guard. The cameras remained focused on him. The audience waited. The host said nothing. And for one tense moment, the entire theory seemed to hang on whatever words Bob Joyce would say next. Then he finally opened his mouth to answer. Following the shocking confrontation on TV, what could Bob Joyce possibly say in response to these allegations? Keep watching to find out. Bob Joyce finally faces the truth. His first words came slowly. "That's," he began, then stopped. His hand moved toward his chest almost instinctively, a gesture that could suggest self-comfort during emotional pressure. It did not look like a performance. It looked like the moment when someone who had spent years protecting an image suddenly realized it was beginning to crack. "That's a question I've asked myself," he finally said, but his voice had changed. It was quieter, softer, and far less rehearsed. The host did not interrupt. That decision mattered. In most interviews, silence is quickly filled, but this time, he simply waited. He allowed Joyce to sit with the weight of his admission, because he had admitted something. He had questioned his own belief. He had admitted that doubt existed. What followed was perhaps the most revealing part. Instead of returning to his familiar talking points, Joyce became more reflective. He spoke about how he had first become interested in the theory and how certain details surrounding Elvis Presley's death had made him question the official story. Then he said something that seemed to surprise even himself. At some point, he admitted, the research had stopped being only about Elvis. It had started becoming about him. He could no longer completely separate his search for truth from his search for meaning. For a brief moment, Joyce seemed completely exposed, but that vulnerability did not last. Slowly, his defenses returned. Perhaps he realized he had said too much. He began retreating into the safety of his familiar arguments. He returned to the photographs, facial similarities, and timeline. But something had changed. If Joyce immediately said yes, it would suggest that his belief remained open to evidence and could change if stronger facts appeared. But if he said no, it would suggest the theory had become more powerful than an investigation. It had become a belief protected from evidence. Joyce did not answer immediately. He paused. He thought. And that hesitation may have revealed more than his eventual words. For a moment, he genuinely seemed unsure how to answer. Perhaps somewhere inside, he understood that the theory had become more important to him than simply discovering whether it was true. He had invested years of his life in the story. His reputation, identity, and sense of purpose had become connected to it. Admitting he could be wrong was no longer simply about correcting a belief. When he finally answered, he tried to leave the door open. I'd have to examine that proof very carefully. But the host appeared to hear something else. To him, it sounded less like openness and more like a willingness to search for reasons to reject evidence that threatened the theory. The host's expression changed. There was no laughter, no mockery, only something that looked almost like sadness. The answer seemed to confirm what he had suspected. Maybe Bob Joyce was no longer simply searching for the truth. Maybe he was searching for something more personal. He was searching for validation. What evidence sparked the comparison between Bob Joyce and Elvis Presley? Keep watching to find out. The evidence behind the Bob Joyce mystery. Pastor Bob Joyce appeared in Benton, Arkansas in the early 1980s, only a few years after Elvis Presley was officially pronounced dead in Memphis. He arrived quietly, without much public attention, without a detailed personal history that people could easily verify, and began building his ministry from the ground up. Whenever people asked about Joyce's life before Benton, where he had come from, or what he had been doing before finding his calling, the answers often remained incomplete. He was not necessarily avoiding the questions, but his responses were usually vague enough to satisfy basic curiosity while revealing very little about his earlier life. People who have tried to trace Joyce's background before Benton have repeatedly encountered gaps and missing information. Those gaps could mean something important, or they could simply reflect an ordinary lack of records or public information. Then there is the physical resemblance, which believers have examined with extraordinary attention. Technology that can show how a person might look as they age has become increasingly advanced over the past 2 decades. Amateur investigators have spent countless hours comparing Pastor Joyce's photos with images of Elvis Presley at different ages. They examine facial structure, bone shape, eye distance, jaw size, and forehead proportions. Believers argue these similarities are not simply coincidences created by people desperate to find a connection between Joyce and Elvis. They believe the features appear similar in ways that go beyond the normal changes that happen to every human face as people grow older. Skeptics strongly disagree. They argue that when people desperately want to find a connection, they will eventually find one. Confirmation bias, they say, can make an ordinary resemblance appear extraordinary. People naturally focus on the features that match while overlooking the ones that do not. After all, millions of people around the world share similar facial characteristics, without secretly being the same person. But the voice is where the debate becomes even more intense. Various analysts and enthusiasts have compared recordings of Pastor Joyce and Elvis Presley, examining the small details that make every human voice unique. They study frequency, pitch, breathing patterns, speech rhythm, pronunciation, and the particular resonance created by the shape of the throat, mouth, and nasal passages. Some comparisons have been presented by believers as evidence that the similarities are remarkable, perhaps too unusual to dismiss easily. Others remain unconvinced. They argue that talented voice imitators can reproduce many characteristics of a famous singer's voice after years of practice, especially when someone has spent a lifetime listening closely to the same performer. There is no widely accepted scientific evidence proving that Joyce and Elvis had the same voice. Much of the debate remains centered on comparisons, interpretations, and competing claims. The truth, therefore, remains in an uncomfortable gray area, where neither complete certainty nor complete dismissal feels entirely convincing. But believers say the voice is only one part of the story. They also point to Joyce's behavior. Watch Pastor Joyce closely while he is speaking or performing, and some believers claim that certain movements look strangely familiar, almost as if they belong on a much larger stage. Even the way he holds a microphone has attracted attention. Believers argue that it does not resemble something learned simply from years of singing in a church. Instead, they point to the exact timing of his pauses, the way he moves between phrases, and the rhythm he uses when addressing a crowd. To them, these are habits similar to those developed by performers who spend years standing in front of enormous audiences. Sometimes, Joyce makes gestures that viewers believe seem more suited to a Las Vegas showroom than a Sunday morning service. Some of these movements appear automatic rather than carefully planned, almost as if his body is repeating habits without conscious effort. Believers argue that this is significant because natural body language can be difficult to control completely. They believe these movements could be deeply learned physical habits rather than deliberate imitation. But once again, there is another possible explanation. Someone who admired Elvis deeply could have watched him for years, copied his gestures, movements, and mannerisms, and eventually absorbed those behaviors without even realizing it. Beyond these allegations, could there be an even deeper mystery surrounding Bob Joyce? Stay tuned to find out. The mystery around Bob Joyce. Bob Joyce was not a televangelist. His church, Household of Faith, began as a very small congregation around 2010, with only 7 or 8 people meeting each week in his living room. By 2014, the congregation had moved into a rented business space on Salem Road in Benton, a location with room for roughly 35 to 40 chairs. 5 years later, in 2019, the church moved again, this time to Salt Creek Road, where it could accommodate about 100 people and had around 20 parking spaces. Then came another major change. In June 2024, Joyce purchased a new 9-acre property on Samples Road. The property included a 36 by 108-foot metal building that had originally been constructed as a horse barn. The building was later transformed into a church sanctuary with seating for more than 250 people and parking for 75 vehicles. The first service at the new location was held on August 31st, 2025. But questions arose about how that growth was being financed. Household of Faith's own website described its members as retired, disabled, or working people. There was no major paid staff, gift shop, national fundraising network, or large publishing operation publicly associated with it. Estimates of Joyce's personal net worth ranged from $600,000 to as much as $3 million, depending on the source. Those figures were estimates, not verified financial records. That created a question for people investigating his story. How could a pastor serving a small congregation maintain a 31-acre estate while also purchasing property and developing a much larger church facility? In April 2025, a man named Gregory Pritchard traveled to Benton with his wife and son to see Joyce's operation for himself. They arrived during a power outage and storm damage. Pritchard later discussed the visit in a YouTube interview, describing the church property as secluded and commenting on what he believed was a striking difference between the modest size of the congregation and the scale of Joyce's personal holdings. He described a community protective of its pastor's privacy. Pritchard's account attracted attention because it was presented as first-hand observation rather than simply another online theory. But his impressions could not establish Joyce's finances, identity, or past. By then, questions surrounding Joyce had been circulating for more than a decade. Could Bob Joyce have had a hidden past before the Elvis comparison put him in the limelight? Stay tuned to find out. Bob Joyce's hidden past. According to Joyce's official website, his full legal name is Robert Wayne Joyce. He was born on June 19, 1952, married his wife, Willina, in 1975, was ordained as a pastor in 1981, and later earned a degree from Dallas Baptist University. On paper, those details provide a basic outline of his life. But for a man who has remained at the center of a long-running Elvis theory, the amount of publicly available information about his earlier years appears surprisingly limited. There are few widely documented details about his childhood, his early friendships, or his life before marriage and his ministry in Benton. To believers, those missing details represent another possible piece of the puzzle. Skeptics see them very differently. To them, these are simply gaps in someone's personal history that have been given far more meaning than they deserve. And that distinction is important. A missing record does not automatically prove that someone is hiding their identity. A private life does not automatically point to a secret past. But when important details are difficult to verify, the unanswered questions naturally remain. By his early 20s, Joyce appears in public records as a married musician, and his voice has been compared by some people to that of Elvis Presley. That perceived similarity has continued to fuel speculation about whether there could be a deeper connection between the two men. Then the conflicting information made the story even more confusing. Some biography websites listed Joyce's birth year as 1965 or 1966 instead of 1952, creating a difference of more than a decade. One detailed profile claimed he was born on July 11, 1966, in St. John, Canada, to a father named Patrick Joseph. The same profile described him as a Canadian musician who had received formal musical training. These were not small spelling errors or minor differences in dates. They appeared to describe a completely different person. But beyond all the mystery and allegations, what was Elvis Presley's life really like? Keep watching to find out. Elvis Presley's legacy. Elvis Aaron Presley, born on January 8, 1935, and who died on August 16, 1977, was an American singer and actor who became known worldwide as the King of Rock and Roll. His powerful voice, energetic performances, and unforgettable stage presence transformed popular music and made him one of the most influential entertainers of the 20th century. Presley's breakthrough came in 1956 when he signed with RCA Victor and released Heartbreak Hotel. The song quickly became a #1 hit, and within a year, RCA had sold millions of his records. His television appearances and exciting performances soon made him the biggest star in the growing rock and roll movement. However, his style also caused controversy, with critics accusing his performances of being too provocative for young audiences. That same year, Presley made his film debut in Love Me Tender. He later starred in successful movies including Jailhouse Rock, Blue Hawaii, and Viva Las Vegas. After serving in the U.S. military beginning in 1958, he returned to music and continued building an extraordinary career. By the 1960s, much of his attention had shifted toward Hollywood, but in 1968, he made a powerful comeback through the NBC television special Elvis. The success of the special led to major concerts, including his famous Las Vegas performances. In 1973, Presley made history with Aloha from Hawaii via satellite, a concert broadcast internationally to millions of viewers. Behind the fame, however, his health was declining. Years of substance abuse and poor health eventually took a serious toll. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley died at Graceland at just 42 years old. Despite his short life, Presley became one of the best-selling artists in history, selling hundreds of millions of records worldwide. Decades after his death, Elvis remains an enduring symbol of music, fame, and cultural influence. Could these revelations bring the answers to the mystery surrounding Bob Joyce? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for staying with us as we looked into the truth about Bob Joyce. Could this be the answer the world needs? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to explore more stories. See you there.